So this is our book review on Act Made Simple by Anna Khalil and Joshua Ortiz. Chapter 1, The Human Challenge. So the human mind has evolved in several ways that create psychological suffering. Act and commitment therapy shows us a way forward to face many of life's hardships by reducing the impact of painful thoughts and feelings while showing us how to take action to build more meaningful lives. ACT is a behavioral therapy that focuses on inspiring those to follow a path that really matters to them and increase their ability to be mindful of their own experiences. ACT was created by Stephen C. Hayes in the mid-1980s and has evolved from the field of psychology called behavior analysis. ACT helps us clarify what is important to us and motivate us to do things that will enable us to handle difficult thoughts and feelings effectively. There are 6 core processes of ACT, and that is present moment, where we pay attention to our own experiences in the moment and narrowing, broadening, shifting, or sustaining your focus depending on the situation. Diffusion, this means to learn how to separate or detach from your thoughts, images, and memories. Acceptance, opening up and making room for unwanted private experiences to freely flow through us. Self as context is usually referred to noticing self or observing self that is aware of what we're thinking, feeling, sensing, or doing anything in the moment. Values, how we want to behave on a daily basis. This gives us a direction to guide our lives journey. Committed action. This means to take effective action guided by our values. This includes physical action and psychological action. Committed action includes goal setting, action planning, and problem solving, skills training, behavioral activation, and exposure. So this image is the ACT triflex, and it's used to describe psychological flexibility, which chunks together the 6 core processes into 3 large chunks. So unhooking skills refers to all the 4 core processes ACT mindfulness has, such as diffusion, acceptance, self as context, and contacting the present moment, that can be used in any combination to unhook ourselves from difficult thoughts and feelings to reduce their impact and influence over overt and covert behavior. So ACT is a cognitive behavioral treatment that uses values and mindfulness skills to help individuals live lives that are rich and meaningful. 6 key processes underpin it: values, committed action, and the 4 mindfulness processes of diffusion, acceptance, self as context, and contacting the present moment. These may be broken down into 3 main steps: being present, opening up, and doing what matters. Behave's goal is to help people develop psychological flexibility, which is defined as the ability to focus on and engage in what we're doing, to open up and make room for our thoughts and feelings, and to act effectively while led by our beliefs. Chapter 2, Getting Hooked. Our cognitions dominate our behavior in a manner that is self-defeating and usually have a negative influence on our actions and awareness. There are 6 broad categories of fusion. Fusion with the past refers to all types of past-oriented cognition, such as rumination, regret, dwelling on painful memories, blame, and resentment over past events, and idealizing the past. Fusion with the future refers to all types of future-oriented cognition, including worrying, catastrophizing, predicting the worst, hopelessness, anticipating failure, rejection, hurt, and loss. Fusion with self-concept refers to all types of self-descriptive and self-evaluative cognition, including negative self-judgment, positive self-judgment, over-identifying with a label. Fusion with reasons give humans a reason as to why we can't change. Fusions with rules is often how others specify conditions as to how others themselves and the world should be. And fusion with judgments is any type of judgment or evaluation, either positive or negative. Experiential avoidance refers to desire to avoid unwanted experiences. making us more susceptible to suffer psychologically in the long run. A very important point about acceptance versus avoidance in the ACT advocates experiential acceptance under two circumstances: when avoidance of thoughts and feelings is limited or possible, or when avoidance of thoughts and feelings is possible, but the methods used make life worse in the long run. Fusion is the overarching pathological process in ACT, and when we are hooked by our thoughts and feelings, we may go into automatically obeying our thoughts and feelings that make us act aggressively or put us in a state to do whatever we can to get rid of such thoughts and feelings. Chapter 3: Mindfulness and Other Dodgy Words. In ACT, mindfulness is only one of the shady words. Values, commitment, acceptance, and self-compassion are among the many others. These words have a lot of negative implications. They're okay for some clients, but they can elicit unfavorable responses for others. So when we get to these issues, I'll provide a list of alternative terms to use. Remember to alter and change everything in ACT to suit your own style and the clients you work with. Change, tweak, or adapt a word, metaphor, tool, or technique if you feel it will not be properly received by a client. Don't follow the script, be original. Chapter 4: Get Your Geek On. Functional contextualism is a philosophy of science that underpins the ACT model. Antecedents are facts that trigger the behavior in question by focusing on situation, thoughts, and feelings. Every behavior has its payoffs and costs. If the cost of the behavior lead to reducing or stopping over time, we can call them punishing consequences. If the payoffs of a behavior lead to maintaining or increasing over time, we can call them reinforcing consequences. All of the ideas covered in this chapter are used often in ACT. We employ mindfulness, for example, to heighten awareness of antecedents, that is, to notice the thoughts, feelings, and conditions that trigger the action in issue, as well as to track the consequences of the activity, what effects it has, both short-term and long-term. We also employ mindfulness and values to help people change how they respond to antecedents, so that the same situation, ideas, and feelings previously prompted away moves now serve as antecedents for towards moves. Chapter 5: Setting Up for Success. Therapists come to ACT with differing ideas about the first session. In the first session, we aim to establish rapport, obtain informed consent, take history, establish behavioral goals, do a brief experiential exercise, and give simple homework. With clients that are high functioning, we can often accomplish a list above tasks in one session. With lower functioning clients with multiple problems, it could take 2 or more sessions. The therapeutic relationship is very important in ACT as it strengthens this therapy type by facilitating authentic relationships. ACT is a very active form of therapy that is used to help clients build the lives they want to live by learning skills to unhook us from difficult thoughts and feelings to reduce their impact and take away their powers so they cannot hold us back. The major takeaway from this chapter is to properly set up your sessions. It's similar to constructing the foundation for a house. You're going to construct. Expect a lot of issues with the construction process if the foundation isn't correctly laid. You can't afford to misinform consent since it's such an important aspect of this foundation. Building a great alliance is also important, so think of your clients as a rainbow, not obstacles. Chapter 6: What's the problem? There are 8 key areas of history. Presenting complaints are you want to gather information that's bottom and left on the choice point. Initial values assessment is getting a sense of the client's values. Current life context uncovers the external barriers to build a rich and full life. These will require values-based problem solving and action planning. Relevant past history. ACT is very focused on the present and is important to gather past history that is relevant to current issues. Psychological rigidity. Look for the 6 core processes of psychological rigidity. Motivational factors. Identifying positive motivational factors. Psychological flexibility. Look for the evidence of the 6 core processes of psychological flexibility. Client resources. Find what strengths, skills, and other personal resources the client has. So establishing behavioral goals for therapy are doing goals of what they want to do. To establish overt goals, we can ask the client, what will you do differently? What will you start or stop doing? What will you do more of or less of? How will you treat yourself, the world, and others differently? To establish covert behavioral goals, you can ask the client, are there any tasks or activities you'll be better at able to focus on or engage in? Are there any people you'll be more attentive to or more present with? Is there anyone or anything you'll be able to appreciate more? Emotional goals versus behavioral goals. So emotional goals are how we want to feel. Common goals include getting rid of unwanted thoughts and feelings. Behavioral goals are what I want to do, such as learning a new skill or a psychological and physical skill. There are 2 different person's goals, which is dead person goals, and that's anything that a corpse can do better than a living human being. For example, a corpse will never use drugs, never procrastinate, never have a panic attack, and never feel depressed. A living person's goal is goals that a living human can do better than a corpse. Therapists must establish behavioral goals as soon as possible, even if they are vague, generic goals covered in informed consent. Chapter 7. Where do I start? So the first session, we are establishing rapport, taking history, obtaining informed consent, establishing behavioral goals. And within the first session, we could also set up some homework for the client between sessions, such as the point of homework is to increase a client's self-awareness, provide useful information, which helps with the setting an agenda and deciding what to target first. It allows the client to notice their thoughts and feelings, and this allows to explore values, goals, and committed action. Worksheets are often helpful as they act as a reminder of the session to increase the chances of a client to follow through to the next section. So as we go into active intervention with an emphasis on experiential work in session and homework routine sessions, we collect a history, build rapport, gain informed consent, and establish behavioral goals for therapy, which is core work for the first session or 2. We need to dance around these 3 broad processes, show and act triflex, when undertaking experiential work, being present, opening up, and doing what counts. We need to work on values and dedicated action to get the client moving. When the client is stuck, we need to focus on diffusing and accepting the situation. If we are stuck, focus on going back to being present and letting go of your anchor. Chapter 8. Creative what? Creative hopelessness is a process in which one becomes aware that trying hard to avoid or get rid of unwanted thoughts and feelings tend to make life worse rather than better. Emotional control strategies are anything we do to get rid of unwanted thoughts and feelings, overt or covert behaviors that are predominantly motivated by experiential avoidance. There are 5 basic questions, which goes by the acronym of DOTS. D stands for distraction, O stands for opting out, T stands for thinking strategies, and S stands for substances and other strategies. You don't have to use creative hopelessness with every client. It's an optional aspect of ACT. If your client has a high level experiential avoidance and is simply concerned in feeling good or getting rid of their difficult ideas and feelings, you must perform creative hopelessness. Otherwise, you will become stuck. Clients will discover that it profoundly confirms their own experience as long as it's done with compassion and curiosity, rather than judgment, condescension, or lecturing. Chapter 9, Dropping the Struggle. Dropping the struggle is a metaphor that is a fantastic way to transition into a more formal, explicit work on acceptance. They also serve as a valuable link between creative hopelessness and readiness to try new things. Chapter 10, Dropping Anchor. A multi-purpose mindfulness tool, dropping anchor is a simple yet powerful technique for contacting the present moment. Dropping the anchor is the first mindfulness skill you'll formally teach clients who struggle with several psychological defects: emotional dysregulation, hypoarousal, hyperarousal, dissociation, etc. You should drop the anchor when a client wants to learn simple mindfulness skills. The client is unable to engage or participate in the session. The client is emotionally overwhelmed. It acts impulsively or compulsively or dissociating. And there are 3 steps to drop the anchor. We could use the acronym ACE. A stands for acknowledging your inner experience. C stands for coming back into your body. And E stands for engaging with the world. This 3-step structure helps us to improvise different exercises to give control over the client's actions. So we can create hundreds of new exercises by improvising around this structure. This practice helps you unhook from or make room for difficult thoughts and feelings, raises your own awareness, and gives you conscious control over your actions, making it a very useful skill to circuit break impulsive, compulsive, aggressive, addictive, or self-harming behaviors, interrupting cognitive processes such as worrying, ruminating, and dealing with intense emotions, severe fusion, and dissociating efficiently. Chapter 11, Notice that thought. Diffusion means responding flexibly to your cognitions so they can influence but do not dominate your behavior. This aims to see the true nature of cognitions and to respond these cognitions more flexibly in terms of workability rather than literally. Number 1, find what's hooking you by identifying the cognitive context the client is fusing with. Number 2, make the link. Make a connection between fusion and problematic behaviors. Number 3, offer the client a new skill. Number 4, normalize and validate their difficult thoughts. And lastly, introduce a metaphor to summarize their problems of fusion and the benefits of diffusion. There are 5 key procedures to set the scene for diffusion. Figure out what's got you hooked, define the cognitive material with which the client is combining, introduce a metaphor to summarize the problems of fusing and the benefits of diffusion, offer a new skill, offer diffusion as a solution to the problems identified above, normalize and validate difficult thoughts, and introduce a metaphor to summarize the problems of fusion and the benefits of diffusion. Chapter 12, Deeper into diffusion. When you introduce clients with diffusion techniques, make sure to do so with great empathy and respect. Make sure you establish clear guidelines with the clients. There's not one linear method. Make sure to stay on your toes and make sure you rid the client of unwanted thoughts and feelings during the exercises. There are many different diffusion procedures, and the ones described in this chapter are just a handful of them. To avoid confusion and invalidation, always introduce them to clients with great empathy and respect. Make sure you've established a clear explanation, and everything should be treated as an experiment, since you never know what will happen. Be aware of frequent misunderstandings, such as belief that the goal is to feel good or to eliminate negative ideas. Chapter 3, The Diffusion Smorgasbord. Notice is the first step in any diffusion, to notice what cognitions are present. Name is to name the cognition or cognitive process that is usually the second step in diffusion. Neutralizing, most diffusion techniques include a step that I call neutralizing. Start with a quick and easy technique before moving on to more challenging meditative exercises. Be alert for the possibility of invalidation and err on the side of caution with the techniques you use. Remember, diffusion is a process, not a technique. There are several techniques for instigating and reinforcing this process, and the aim is to find ones that suit both yourself and your client. The next steps are to actively practice skills in the session. Debrief each exercise and ask how it might help the client's issues, and assign additional practice for homework after you've paved the way to start explicitly working on diffusion skills with clients. Here are a few general guidelines for mastering diffusion skills. Begin with simple approaches before progressing to more difficult contemplative activities, such as those found in Chapter 15. Keep an eye out for validation and err on the side of caution when it comes to tactics you like to utilize. Diffusion is a method, not a technique, to remember. There are ways to start and reinforce this process, and the goal is to discover ones that work for both you and your client. Chapter 14, Barriers to Diffusion. To begin practice diffusion on yourself, break free from your own concerns and uncertainties and begin actively practicing ACT rather than merely talking about it. Secondly, be an ACT role model for your clients. In each session, live your ideals and be mindful. Empathy, respect, and compassion should all be present in your work. Instead of seeing your clients as barriers, think of them as rainbows. Third, before leading to the light, dance in the dark. If you believe a particular intervention may be invalidating, don't do it. There are always other options. And if you ever inadvertently invalidate a client, apologize right away and explain what your true objectives were. Chapter 15, Leaves, Streams, Clouds, and Sky. As an alternative to rumination, worrying, and the like, give clients contemplative exercises that entail thought watching or thought listening. We must always be clear about the goal and how it will help the client with his problems. We should always tailor the exercise to client's needs, shorten it, lengthen it, changing the metaphor, or shifting the focus from seeing to hearing thoughts. We always want to properly discuss the exercise later to ensure that the client understands how it relates to their problems. Finally, assuming the client recognizes the exercise's potential benefits, we want to urge him to practice it in between sessions. Chapter 16, Technique Overload and Other Perils. We need to make use of our imagination when it comes to our methods. Mix and combine, adapt and tweak, and if you're feeling adventurous, come up with your own. The more uncommon or difficult the approach, the more critical it is to be clear about its purpose and to explicitly link it to the client's difficulties or therapy goals. After each exercise, debrief with the client and discuss how it relates to their concerns or helps them achieve their therapeutic goals. See if you can make it into a homework activity if the client found it useful and perceives it relevant. Finally, be adaptable with your methods. Consider the following questions before you begin. What essential processes do you want to encourage? Does this technique seem likely to help this client? And at this point in the session, to experience the desired process. Either stop using or adapt and modify a technique if it isn't helping to foster the process you want.
One of the things that I thought was interesting in ACT model is the concept of being present. And we learn in chapter 17 that there's only one thing that is the most important to us, and that is the time and now. And this model teaches us that being present adds value as it allows for mindfulness to happen. So this chapter starts with the quote from Leo Tolstoy, and this quote is that there is only one time that is important, now. It is the most important time because it is the only time that we have any power. The author mentions that the meaning of this quote is that life happens now, and now is all we have. Although the past and the future exists, and the past exists in our life by the thoughts that we have from the past, like, or the experience that we had in the past and the reflection that we make about these experiences. However, we have to realize that all these thoughts that we're having, it's happening now, and the reflection that we're making, it's happening now. So the past exists, but it exists by the thoughts and reflection and experiences of it and the memories of it, and all that is happening now. While the future is important, but it also kind of exists in a form of thoughts as we are planning for it and we're predicting it, and all of that is happening while we're here and now. And this code teaches us that this moment is all we have. Living in the moment can be as simple as stopping and smelling the roses. And I thought that was interesting because things like that we usually don't do, like smelling the roses and kind of acknowledging the beauty of the rose or appreciating the beauty of the nature, because we're constantly in the go mode, and we are constantly rushing to do things, and we don't stop to do small things that I guess we kind of take for granted, such as the beauty of the nature or the smell of a rose or enjoying a cup of tea, or even to appreciate the blessings that we have in life, because a lot of the time, those are the things that we take for granted. And the ACT model teaches us that living in the moment and acknowledging the blessings and them enjoying the moment, those are really important tasks. Living in the moment allows us to pay attention, and it allows us to be conscious of our choices. And I think this is really interesting because when we pay attention and we fully engage in an activity, then we are creating this mindfulness and we are conscious of our choices and the decisions that we make. When we fully engage in an activity, we can also fully and deeply experience that the experience. Like we can fully engage, and we can experience the richness and the fullness of the activity that we're doing. So the cost of not being present or living in the moment or having mindfulness. There are several costs of this. One of them is cutting off people while we're having conversations. So if you notice that you are having a conversation and you are constantly cutting people off, then this is a sign that you're not being present or you're not in the moment. Because being in the moment means engaging in a conversation with somebody, listening to what they're saying, taking away from what they have said, and then kind of reflecting on it and share what you think about what this person had said. But if you haven't done that, if you are just cutting people off, then that's a sign that you're not being present. And it also kind of makes the other person feel like that they're not being valued, or what they're saying has no value to you. You're just kind of sharing what you think is important. Not being present can also be seen if you are missing out on important aspects of relationships. For example, if you're not spending time with others, and if you're not spending quality time with people that are important to you, and if you're constantly missing out on their most important events, such as if you're missing out on somebody's birthday, or if you're missing out somebody's graduation or their wedding, and you're constantly missing out those events, and you are just not, I guess, if you're just not there to enjoy those things with them, it can result into losing that relationship. And oftentimes we see that family relationship falls out, or there are times when you have a falling out with your friends, and this is because you're missing out on important aspects of these relationships by not going to these events or not spending quality time with them. Another thing we learn is that not being present can create or can result into doing things poorly. Like you're not fully engaging in an activity, you're not fully engaging in doing a book review or writing an article, and then it can result into doing things poorly. three broad classes of skills for having mindfulness and being present are engaging skills, savoring skills, and focusing skills. So basically for engaging skills is that acknowledging that we have to fully engage in a current activity. And the savoring skill is that savoring and enjoying and appreciating your current activity. And the focusing skills is focusing fully on your current activity. And when we do all three of these things, we're engaging and we're savoring and we're focusing. We're creating for our mindfulness to happen, and we're deeply experiencing, or we're experiencing the richness or the full experience of an activity that we're doing. So the author created an activity called the Notice Your Hand activity. And this activity can be done while doing the ACT therapy with the client. This activity was inspired by the author's 10-month-old son. And I should mention here that there are two authors for this book. It doesn't specify which author made this activity. However, one of their authors' 10-month-old son would hold up his hands and wiggle his fingers. I guess it was like a moment where the 10-month-old son just discovered that he has a hand and he has his fingers, and he's just fascinated by his hand. And watching his son made this author realize that this could be a fun mindfulness activity. So basically this activity is just to observe your hand, just holding up your hand and just observing your hand, and just doing this for 5 minutes and trying to be fully present while you're doing this. And this will allow us to notice our feelings, like what you feel at the moment while you were observing your hand. This goes on to say that we want, in SCT models, that we want clients to fully engage in his or her experiences and to genuinely connect with the other person. And this can also be practiced. Like if you're not feeling this activity, and if you're feeling that, no, this is not something I want to do, you can also do something like connecting, like just spending some time with your pets, or like really connecting with them, enjoying the moment with them, and just paying full attention to your pets. Or you can also do this by nature, by like connecting with the nature, like watching the nature and really fully being engaged with the nature, like you're deeply immersed into the beauty of the nature. So either way, you can either do the notice your hand activity, or connecting with your pets, or connecting with the nature, but just being present while you're connecting, and just doing that for 5 minutes. The next thing I'm going to mention, that something we find in chapter 18, it's called Holding Ourselves Kindly. Actually, the whole chapter is about self-compassion and being kind to us. And I think this comes handy because while we're reflecting on the past and we're thinking of the future and we're trying to be in present, sometimes self-compassion goes a long way, because as we're reflecting our past, we're reflecting on our past experiences of pain. And this is when we have to be self-compassionate. And what does self-compassion mean? Self-compassion usually means that we acknowledge that life is hard and life is going to be hard. And in life, we're going to be experiencing pain. But the main thing is that we respond to these painful experiences with genuine kindness and being caring. So we're being caring and being kind to ourselves. And we respond to the pain that we had felt and the pain that others have felt with genuine kindness and empathizing with that person. And being kind to ourselves is a huge act of courage. And why is that? Why is being kind to ourselves seen as a courage? It's because acknowledging pain is deemed as like a sign of weakness to many people. Many people feel that acknowledging pain is is something that's weak. We don't want to acknowledge it's painful. And this can result into self-destructive behavior sometimes, because oftentimes we haven't dealt with this pain. And this turns into a big, it creates a big void in us, and it can turn into self-destructive behavior. We learn in the ACT model that there are 6 building blocks of self-compassion. The first is to acknowledge the wound. So you acknowledge that there is pain. And the second is being human. So being human about the pain that we have acknowledged. And we treat ourselves kindly. Number 3 is to disarm the critic. So while you're acknowledging this pain, watching our thoughts, that we don't put down ourselves or take things lightly or too lightly, and we just kind of fully give space to this pain. Number 4 is to holding ourselves kindly. So being kind to us and react to our experiences with genuine kindness. Number 5 is making room for our pain. So again, acknowledging the pain and making room for the pain. And number 6 is seeing ourselves in others. So basically what this means is that we look at others and we empathize with themselves, and we understand that we could have been in their shoes, and we respond to their pain with genuine kindness. Knowing what matters. So this is the chapter 19. This is basically the main aim or purpose of ACT. Knowing what matters. The author mentions developing the ability for mindful values-guided action, technically known as psychological flexibility. And the more we develop this ability, the greater our potential to live a rich and meaningful life will happen. And this is the main principle behind the ACT model, which motivates everything that we do. So basically developing the ability to be mindful and to make values-guided action. And I'm going to explain this further soon. And all this ability to be mindful while acknowledging and knowing our values. And this is what the ACT model encourages. So I'm going to explain how to make value-guided actions. So there are 3 important aspects of values: the ongoing actions, global qualities, and desired outcomes. So oftentimes people would ask, how do we know our values, or why is knowing our values important? So values are the things that we care about, and that values are the things that kind of molds our personality or who we are. And the 3 important aspects of values are, one of them is ongoing actions, or how we want to behave in an ongoing basis. So our values kind of guide how we behave in an ongoing basis. For example, how do you want to behave in a relationship with loved ones? If you really valued your relationship with a loved one, it would be loving and caring, or you would be fair and honest, you would be open and authentic, you would be mindful and compassionate. If you really valued the relationships, it would do everything in your power to make those things, relationships stay. So you would be loving and caring, and you'd be fair and honest, you'd spend your time. And if you value something, you care about it enough to make it work. The next important aspect is global qualities, or the ongoing actions, such as, so the global qualities are the ongoing actions. So it's like something you do for a period of time on an ongoing basis, such as if you like to play baseball, then you play baseball on an ongoing basis. Or if you like to work out, then you have a routine of going to gym every day and working out. So that would be the global qualities. And that's also created by the values that you have. And the third aspect is the desired outcome, and the values that means that the values that are desired. So this section teaches us that how we want to behave is how we want to act, and the values help us to do the right thing, and the values guides us to do the right thing. And the values that we have molds the person that we are, and it guides us to behave in an ongoing basis based on the things that we truly care about. 6 key points of values. So number 1 is values are here and now, and goals are in the future. So this brings us back to being mindfulness and being in the present and valuing the time that we have right now. And the goals will be in the future. So we don't spend too much time thinking about the future, and we think about now. The second one is that values never need to be justified. You don't need to justify your values to anybody. It just has to matter to you, because oftentimes a lot of people might not care about the values that you have, or they may not understand the values that you have. For example, if your values are, if you're a spiritual or religious person, and if you like to pray and meditate, somebody else might not understand this fact. Therefore, you should know that your values just needs to be justified to you and nobody else. You don't have to justify all your values to others, or basically you don't have to prove your values to others. Number 3 is values often need to be prioritized. So you have to prioritize your values and make time for it. Number 4, values are best held lightly. So you don't take it too seriously and you just hold it lightly, because you don't want to overburden yourself while you're acknowledging your values. Number 5, values are freely chosen. So you choose your values, and you don't let other people's ideas to choose your values. And often, sometimes that could happen. One of the things we can do is to make conscious decisions about the values that we have and the values that we want to choose for ourselves. Number 6 is values include self and others. And we can quickly zip through these values that we have, like the ones that I mentioned, and we can kind of like form our values from these goals that the authors have mentioned, while keeping in mind that our values don't have to be justified to others, and our values have to be prioritized. They can be held lightly. However, they have to be freely chosen, and values include self and others. And the values happen here and now. We can choose to act on values, or we can choose to neglect them. It shouldn't be forced on us. In ACT therapy, or in SAT therapy, we help our clients connect with their own humanity to find out who they are and who they want to be. So basically, this means that we help our clients to connect to themselves by acknowledging their values, because this helps us to find out who they are and who they want to be. However, there will be some clients who will always, who might always say that, I don't have any values, or nothing matters. And if somebody's saying this could be a number of things. This could be because of a number of things. So one of the reason could be because the client is feeling depressed. And the other thing could be that the client simply doesn't know or has no idea what values are or what values mean. And if this is the case, then it would be the therapist's position to gently persist or to gently encourage the conversation. Some clients might be focused on gaining approval of others, or this can take into the form of pleasing others. A client might be so focused on gaining approval of others that the client doesn't or haven't had the chance to kind of ask this question to themselves, that what their values really are, or what the client values. Some clients might also ask, how do I know these are my values? So again, a client might not know what values mean or what their values are. In ACT model, if clients don't know their aim or purpose in life, or if they don't recognize their values, it can create confusion and resistance while the therapist is providing therapy. So we should, as therapists, we should keep in mind that it's common for clients to struggle with finding values, and that is okay. Therapists can gently persist or gently encourage this conversation. And if it's not, it can be a time-consuming process. And if it's not going anywhere in the conversation, a therapist can remain flexible and can return to this area later. One of the important concepts that we learn in the ACT model is problem solving. So when you have a problem, what are the things we will take, or how far you will go? Will you do what it takes to solve this problem? So the ACT model has a section on mindful and value-based cognitive training. And there are a few steps to take in order to do what it takes to solve the problem. So for example, the first step is to identify and define the problem. And I want to use the example of writing an essay. If writing this essay is really scaring you, or if it's making us like if we're so scared to start this essay, to define this problem is to acknowledge that we're feeling fear to start this essay. And then the next step would be to brainstorm a range of solutions. So for example, we might start with just brainstorming a few ideas about these essays. So if it is just to brainstorm the topics you want to write about, or brainstorming how you want to structure this essay, that would be the next step. And then the third step is to evaluate the pros and cons of each of these options. So one of the pros that I can think of is, like, after writing this essay, I will feel really great about it. And just that feeling of greatness, like you feel so amazing. Like that's one of the pros. And one of the cons would be, if I wasn't writing this essay, I would be doing something else, which could be just as beneficial. For example, maybe earning some money during that time. So that would be one of the cons. And then the fourth step, the ACT model outlines under the mindful value-based cognitive training, is to make it, or to generate an action plan. So we come up with a plan, which we will take to, this plan is for that one problem that's causing distress. So if it's that essay that we're scared to write, so we make an action plan. And this can be something so simple as writing a few paragraphs for this day, and then writing a few paragraphs the next day when we come back. And after we generate this action plan, we will implement this action plan, and we will observe the results. So what went wrong when that implementation happened? And if something didn't go right, we can modify this plan, such as, like, maybe we lacked some resources, like maybe we didn't have access to computers. So maybe the modification would be to get a computer to prevent what went wrong. And the next one, the next thing we'll move on to is the 50 Shades of Acceptance. So accepting our private experiences, such as the thoughts or the feelings or the memories, right? So there's the private thoughts, which nobody knows about, or the private memories, which we will never share with the other person because it makes us very uncomfortable. So sometimes just to accept these private experiences can be as uncomfortable, which is why the ACT model encourages us to accept our private experiences, and not just passively accepting it, because passively accepting our experiences can sometimes lead us to do self-defeating things. So if you have like a painful memory from the past and it's causing us pain, then it could lead to something like drinking or overeating or oversleeping, which can sabotage ourselves. So many times when there is a difficult relationship in the past or a difficult memory in the past, which had caused us pain, we can this pain can increase if we don't accept it and if we continue to do self-defeating things. And the ACT model has the 3 A's of acceptance. So the first A is to acknowledge it. So acknowledging inner and difficult experiences. And many times these experiences are uncomfortable. So for example, if there was an uninvited visitor in our house, the first step would be to acknowledge that this person is here uninvited. And the next step, or the next A, is to accept it. So we let the feeling stay. And then the third A is to accommodate that feeling. So we make room for that person, that uninvited person. And what can we do to accommodate that person? Can we make them a cup of tea? So in other words, we would be making room for the experience and the feelings that we feel. And this would lead us to the next chapter, which is emotion as allies. So many times, one of the things that would be beneficial under the ACT model is the ability to separate emotion from physical action. So if the emotion that you feel is anger, and the physical action of that could be yelling out loud. So in order to separate emotion from the action. So when you feel angry, not to yell. And the other extreme would be to dissociate or the dissociation of emotions, like when you don't feel anything, like there's no emotions that we feel. So there are 3 purposes of emotions. The first one is that emotions communicate. So our facial expression, our body posture, and how we breathe, or, if we're moving our body, like all of that expresses the emotion that we feel. And emotion also motivates. So oftentimes, emotions motivate our body to move, or it's telling us that something has to change. And usually whenever we feel like strong emotions, there are 3 responses to it. There's either the fight, flight, or freeze responses. So are you going to fight about it? Like, are you going to change what it takes? Or are you going to flight, or just take off and leave from that emotion or run away from it? Or are you going to freeze? Like you just feel numb about it and you just can't do anything about it. The other purpose of emotions is that emotion illuminates, like it helps us to realize what's important. So after, like if you feel angry about losing somebody, then it helps us to realize that that person was really important to us. So the emotion often guides us to know what's important and what's not. Under the ACT model, we learn about the flexible exposure. So ACT is an exposure-based model. And there are 2 kinds of exposure. One of them is old school exposure, and this is the most common exposure or the most common treatment used for anxiety disorder. So for example, if we feel a lot of anxiety about writing an essay, then we would increase that exposure. We would increase the exposure to the degree of that challenge. So for example, if writing essays is causing us a lot of anxiety, then you purposely and intentionally expose yourself to write like 5 essays today. Or if it's making us so anxious, then maybe we expose ourselves to that challenge. So we would intentionally expose ourselves to write one essay today, and then gradually increasing that number. And then maybe tomorrow we will write 2 essays, and the next day we will write 5 essays. So you gradually increase that number, and you purposely expose yourself to that challenge in order to deal with that anxiety you feel. And this is known as the old school exposure. And the author introduces a new school exposure in this book, which is more focused on the feelings that we feel. So narrowing down our feelings so the behavioral responses can be decreased. For example, if the feeling you feel is anger, like if you get very angry, we focus on that feeling that we feel, like we focus on that anger and we narrow it down. Like we try to minimize, or we try to narrow down the pain or the anger that we feel to avoid a behavioral response, such as like we don't want to be yelling, so we focus on that feeling, we make room for that feeling in order to minimize the impact or the behavioral response. The author also introduces the problem emotions, otherwise known as, like, a few examples of them are shame or anger or guilt. Although no emotion is inherently problematic, when we have a difficult emotion, could this sound problematic? Like if we feel anger or if we feel shame, is this bringing a lot of strong emotions, which could sound problematic? And the next thing we move on to is the fusion and shame. So sometimes somebody might ruminate and relive the pain of the past. So if there is a painful memory in the past, are we intentionally, or are we feeling that we're being forced to relieve that pain because we always think about it, and thinking about it causes us that pain? Or are we anxious about what could go wrong in the future? Or are we anxious about the negative outcome that can come in the future? And a lot of the times, a lot of us are self-conscious. We have really harsh and negative self-judgment. And we often also give reasons to why we can do certain things. Like if we can come up with a lot of reasons of why we cannot get something done. But, this is when a difficult emotion can turn problematic. We're moving on to flexible relationships. So exploring relationships. Who matters in this relationship? So who's there for us in a relationship? The people who are often there for us and often care about us are the people who matters. And then we can evaluate what's good and bad in this relationship. What are the things that are good? Is this feeling causing me joy and happiness? Or is this feeling just making me feel really drained and upset all the time? So we have to evaluate that. And then we can ask ourselves what we want to get out of this relationship. And oftentimes, it's about what we can give and what we can, or what we can also, want to get out of this relationship, basically. Like, do we want this to be a very meaningful relationship? Do we want a meaningful conversation or meaningful companionship out of this relationship? And what are the things we have tried and how has that worked? So if we've tried to spend quality time, has that worked in the past? If we had tried to do a gesture of kindness, like giving a small gift, has this worked really well? If we were really upset and we were yelling and screaming, did that make our problem worse, or did that cause stress in the relationship? The ACT model introduces a challenge formula, which is you can either leave, which is when you just leave, or you stay and leave by your values. Like you stay in that relationship, but you bring that back to your value, that you're staying and you're changing what you want to improve. So the things that are not going well, we take actions to stop those things, and we improve that relationship. Or we can stay and give up acting ineffectively. So the things that make no differences, or the things that are making things worse, we stop that. So if we're yelling and screaming, we stop that. And that brings us to the last section of the book, which is a therapeutic relationship and ACT model. So when we're providing ACT therapy to a client, we should be mindful. So we listen compassionately to the client. We ask for permission. So we start our sentences with, would this be okay? Like, would it be okay if I did that? We admit when we made a mistake. So if a client didn't feel good about something we said, we can say that we're, sorry, I was wrong. And also being playful, because oftentimes therapy can be scary. So we make a joke or we laugh at a joke. Self-disclosing when necessary. So a lot of the time therapists disclose personal information because this will validate or normalize clients' experiences. And then we declare our values. So helping this person will help me to live my value of helping others and making this world a beautiful place. And then we diffuse our own judgment. So we should always aim to be non-judgmental. However, if we have made a judgment, then we acknowledge it and we say sorry. And we should also be ourselves. So ACT model, how one therapist deliver ACT model can be different from how another therapist delivers it. So we should always be ourselves when we deliver it or when we practice this therapy. And then the next step would be to practice. And oftentimes a lot of people believe that practice makes perfect. And we're not trying to be perfectionist here. We're just trying to practice so we can make more improvement. And allowing ourselves to make mistakes, because a lot of the time we're so focused on being right and, doing things perfectly. So allowing yourself to fail or to make mistakes helps us to avoid perfectionism. And then we come back to our values. So we tie it back to the value of helping others. And that brings us to the end of this book. And I hope that you find this book review helpful. So thank you for listening.